Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Around the nation right here, TYT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you on this Wednesday afternoon. It's the middle of the week, it's hump day. We got a lot of good stories for you, so buckle up. Stay tuned. All right. So we're going to talk about, of course, a little bit of White House infighting. That's always fun. We then are going to talk about the deficit under Republicans, Donald Trump, a little bit of Republican hypocrisy, as well as Democratic cowardice. So that's always fun. Then we have a surprise, another racist Border Patrol agent. You're not going to believe what happened. Disaster. Then we've got the big story here. Bernie Sanders, or I should say the media hits Bernie Sanders over and over and over again. And when Bernie Sanders decides that he wants to fight back, it's a conspiracy. Yeah. So I'm going to break that down, and we're going to talk about that. Okay. Then, finally, we do have, you know that whole thing about, Bernie Sanders can't ever get anything done. What does he actually ever do in Congress? Well, he's teaming up with Elijah Cummings to go after drug companies that have decided to basically collude to fix prices to keep them high and unaffordable. And they also decide to obstruct investigations into them. So now Elijah Cummings and Bernie Sanders have teamed up to try to do that, to probe that. Okay. So I probably could have worded that better. But man, it's it's been a day. It's been a day. Okay. I'm exhausted. Okay. The event, by the way, so yesterday had a great time. I was at the Progressives in the Park event that was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was nice. It was a fun event. I spent some time with some excellent volunteers with the TYT Army. Uh, they signed up quite a few people and approached some politicians to ask them to sign the TYT Economic Pledge. I don't know if you guys are really familiar with that, but it says that anybody who signs it is basically affirming that they're in support of Medicare for all, raising the minimum wage to a living wage, free college for all, the Green New Deal, and getting rid of corruption by getting the money out of politics and instituting an amendment to get money out of politics so we can actually have free and fair elections. So that was really cool. Again, these great volunteers, made some speeches and signed up some people for the pledge. So that was really awesome to be a part of that. I might have actually gotten maybe one or two people to sign up, but again, these volunteers, they did a lot of great work, a lot of hard work, and it was really an honor and a pleasure to be able to see them in action and see what they're doing. So it was a really, really fun day. Okay. So that said, here's what we're going to do. Please like and share the stream, right? So that's really, really important. Smash that like button. Share away on all the different platforms. We're currently streaming on Facebook and on YouTube as well. That goes to help the show. I'm also going to thank some patrons, patreon.com/TYTNation. I want to thank Fred Bayando, Abdullah Ba, Kathy Lee, Matthew Arnold, and Brian Carroll. So thank you to those patrons, patreon.com/TYTNation. That's how you can sign up to support the show and keep us independent on the air. I don't know if you guys follow Kyle Kolinsky, Secular Talk on Twitter, but he's been having the same issue that we have. Humanist Report, same thing. Auto demonetization. So basically what happens is every time we upload a clip, there is a very good chance, almost always instantly demonetized. And then we have to go through the review process Again, this has been happening to me for at least the last 2 weeks. Every time a clip is put up, instantly demonetized. We go through the review process, appeal for review. It takes anywhere from 2 minutes to 3 days for you to get someone, a human being, to actually look at it to possibly approve your video. Now, news and politics, it moves really, really fast. So if you're waiting sometimes up to 3 days for a video to be approved, that's where 80% of your views come within the first couple of hours on those videos. And so he tweeted that out, and yeah, instantly I saw exactly what was happening on my channel as well. And I'm assuming all other progressive news and politics channels. So we are all being affected by this. And the only thing that we can do now is lean on our viewers for support through patreon.com/, or Patreon, minus patreon.com/TYT Nation. But there are, all these other different creators who have their own, Patreon accounts set up. So we need you guys to help out and to keep us on the air, because this demonetization, of course, is it's pretty heavy stuff, and it's the establishment, in cable news working with YouTube to crush us. So anyway, at least that's what I think. Okay, so let's move on here. Let's go to our first story. Now, officials within Donald Trump's administration are expressing some frustration and anger at the president and his foreign policy, as well as at each other. Now, according to the report, the Trump administration continues to send conflicting and contradictory messages to Iran about its terms for new negotiations, adding that for several months, the United States has been actively attempting to pass messages via allies to the Iranians in an effort to move closer to beginning formal diplomatic talks with Tehran. Now, look, I think that would be a great idea. Maybe even a step closer to getting another nuclear deal with Iran. So now I think that'd be a great thing. Look, what we had with the Obama nuclear deal was really good. It is very possible now that because we burned, like Donald Trump literally took this agreement, ripped it up, that Iran is going to drive a lot harder of a bargain, or might not even agree to a deal at all, which would be, of course, incredibly disastrous, right? But if they could at least sit down and see if they can get some sort of deal, well, I'd be in favor of it. Even if Donald Trump just takes the exact thing that Obama had done, slaps his name on it, and says, "Look at me! I solved the problem. I solved Iran." You know what? I don't even care. Go ahead and do that. That's totally something that he could do, just as long as we get some sort of nuclear agreement to make sure that Iran does not create a nuclear weapon, and that we do not have a conflict with Iran. Now, here's the thing. There are people in the Trump cabinet who do want conflict. As the report explains, on the one side, you have National Security Advisor John Bolton urging military solutions, and Trump on the other side not wanting to enter into a military conflict. Now, look, between those two, I would side with Donald Trump. I'm not in favor of a military conflict under any circumstances in the Middle East. I'm sorry. More endless war, not in favor, not a good thing. So if you can get some sort of agreement, some sort of deal, wonderful. I'm in favor of it, right? Now, since we have the neocons on one side, and remember, these are Bush era neocons, right? These are people like John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, who are literally in the administration. Again, they had cheered on the disastrous war, led us toward the disastrous war with Iraq, and Afghanistan, which of course lost us, trillions of dollars, and not to mention the massive toll that it took on both Iraqi, Afghanistan, and Afghani lives, as well as American servicemen and women. So those are two disastrous wars that these guys helped get us into, and it's very difficult to even get out of that. And for Afghanistan, we're not even out of that, right? So huge problems, right? Huge problems. But anyway, so now the result of these two fighting is sending mixed messages to allies and intermediaries alike. Uh, the Daily Beast reports the latest mixed messages and instructions have included at times wildly differing details on preconditions the U.S. would demand for official sit-downs between the two countries, and varying proposals for the length of time for which the Americans would consider suspending economic sanctions on Iranians. Now, that, of course, is a disaster. Or as one former senior administration official who was involved in this infighting called it, quote, absolute amateur hour. Amateur hour. Now, look, I have to note here that in this case, I don't know if Donald Trump's 100% to blame. Now, Donald Trump's got a lot of problems, right? And the reason that he deserves some of the blame is obvious. He chose his cabinet, right? He chose people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. The fish rots from the head down. And he, of course, that means that he sets the culture as well. And so what he's always done is he appoints a bunch of people that are clearly not the best people to be around him, and they just fight it out. Well, that's okay. That might maybe work in business, but we're not in business. We're in government. We need to all get along so that we can actually get things done. So he's got these two in fighting, and then he's just sitting back and not doing anything, right? Now, the other problem with Trump is that he cannot focus on a single thing at a time, and not for very long. And that's, of course, because he's a baby, he's a man-child, he's probably having some sort of mental deterioration, and has never been able to manage his way out of a paper bag. That said, U.S. officials, European officials, and individuals involved in the disparate talks between the U.S. and Iran explained that top Trump administration national security officials are divided about what to put on the table when it comes to negotiating with Tehran, including whether to ease a select set of sanctions, keep them in place, or suspend them altogether. Now, if you're going to do a deal with Iran, I think easing off some of the sanctions would be a good show, or would be a show of good faith, especially since it's not Iran that violated the deal in the first place. It's the United States, it's Donald Trump that ripped up the deal. So yes, I would go and I would ease off some of those sanctions and say, look, let's use this as a starting point to go for a similar deal in the Obama administration, and we'll go from there, because they really did mess up when it came to ripping up that deal. It's a huge mess up. But now the report also says that the tensions stem in part from President Trump's desire to consider a new deal, which is good, while some of his advisors are more reluctant to do so. And of course, we know who those people are. This is according to 2 European officials and 3 individuals associated with brokering talks between Washington and Tehran. Now, look, a nuclear deal, another one, wonderful. I'll take it. Now, again, I would be happy with just bringing back the Obama deal, which was a great deal, and slapping Trump's name on it. That's fine. That's fine. Everybody would know who actually came up with it anyway. It's like Donald Trump's new NAFTA, right? They just took the old NAFTA and slapped Donald Trump's name on it. That's it. They didn't do anything special to really change it, to make it better, which I wish they would have made it a little bit more fair, a little bit better. But again, Donald Trump just takes someone else's work and then barely changes it or doesn't change it at all, other than putting his stamp of approval on it or his name on it, and then he profits, I guess. But anyway, now one more piece from the report that I found a little interesting, right? Uh, Now, the clashing messages are also causing headaches inside the upper echelons of the Trump administration. They've annoyed the president on multiple occasions in recent months, according to a source who's been in the room when those tensions have been discussed at the White House. One source noted that the president had instructed subordinates several weeks ago to clear up the confusion and knock it off with the diplomatic discord. Now, that's funny because here's Trump saying, you need to cut it out. Cut out the fighting. Well, that's it. That's all you're going to do. You know what this situation needs? Maybe a little bit of leadership, other than just cut it out. You know what the president should do? Lead, because that's what the president's supposed to do. But unfortunately, Trump is too lazy to do his job. He literally gets 8 hours of executive time. That's what they call it, right? In order to watch Fox News, eat cheeseburgers, and tweet. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? And right now, he is on vacation in Bedminster, golfing it up. I mean, this guy's an absolute disaster. And it's no surprise that his White House has continued to be incredibly dysfunctional and off message and unable to get anything done. Okay. Moving on. All right. Now, do you remember when Republicans claimed to be fiscally conservative? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Republican politicians would cry about the deficit under Barack Obama. Now, Barack Obama, interestingly enough, he put in austerity measures and he did bring down the deficit to about half of what it is currently. Now, under Trump, federal spending has hit a $3.7 trillion record, and the budget deficit has climbed to about $867 billion so far this year, according to the Treasury Department. And it is expected to go up quite a bit, thanks to, of course, Trump's tax cuts for the rich. So far this year, it's actually went up about 27%. Well, now, wait a minute here. Now, I thought the tax cuts were supposed to pay for themselves. At least that's what they claimed over and over and over. Notice how they don't say that anymore, right? Because they know it's an absolute lie. No, what happened is that these tax cuts overwhelmingly, by and large, benefited the wealthy and large corporations. About 83% of the gains went to the richest Americans and giant multinational corporations. Now, the result of that, of course, is not more jobs, it's not higher pay. No, it's massive corporate profits, executive bonuses, and stock buybacks. Now, the interesting thing about stock buybacks, it explains why the stock market was for quite a long time was incredibly strong. Now, people who don't know a whole lot or are in a bubble, well, they'll look at that. They'll look at the stock market and say, golly gee, look at that. Donald Trump is a miracle for the economy. Look how strong the stock market is. But of course, Wall Street is way different than Main Street, as in a lot of what happens in the stock market doesn't really impact the working class as much. Now, of course, there are people who are lucky enough to have 401k investments, small investments for retirement, etc. Now, some of those people actually did fairly well. And, hey, that's good. But I think the vast majority of the working class who don't have those small investments, we've seen basically no change. And in fact, negative change as, inflation continues to eat up basically what little gains in wages there have actually been. Again, we're not in a great economic outlook. In fact, there's a lot of talk about an upcoming recession, thanks in part to Donald Trump's trade war, these tax cuts on the rich, creating more income and wealth disparity, as well as large deficits and an economic slowdown. So here we go. Already, it looks like we could be heading into a recession within the year or within the next year. So that's wonderful. Now, the Treasury Department report also predicted on Monday a $1 trillion deficit in 2 months at the end of the fiscal year, and analysts noted that it's the most money the federal government has spent in the first 10 months of a fiscal year since the 2009 efforts to pull out of the Great Recession, which I think were largely successful since we did get out of the recession. Now, there were problems with some of that spending. We didn't bail out homeowners, for example. Instead, Obama bailed out the banks. Oh, I was very frustrated about that, and so are rightly so a lot of people. But nonetheless, the recession was ended. And look, during that time, this of the so-called recovery, yes, the wealthy corporations, Wall Street, did fantastically well. They picked right up. But again, you had those problems on Main Street that continued. So really, it was more of a recovery for the wealthier parts of America and not so much for everyone else. Nonetheless, right? So now we're not in a recession as far as spending goes, right? So that's how much money we spent a lot in the recession. Obama did to try to get us out of it. And it was, again, mixed, right? But generally, it got the economy on a better footing than it was under George W. Bush, who was a disaster. Now, we're spending right now just as much, but we're not doing anything. We're not spending it on big social programs. We're certainly not bailing out, the banks like we did before. We're not doing giant infrastructure projects. So now where's all that money going? Oh, right. It's going to the rich, corporations, and corporate welfare. Now, in case there were any remaining doubts on whether Trump's tax cut would pay for itself, it hasn't, according to this is a quote from Chris Liu, the previous White House cabinet secretary and deputy secretary of labor under former President Barack Obama. So now he said this on Tuesday. And look, here's the thing. Nobody with a brain actually believed that. I mean, yes, politicians will say that. Well, they'll talk about, tax cuts paying for themselves all the time when they try to pass it. But in reality, they know it's not true. It's never been true. And there's been numerous examples. Again, the Bush tax cuts. You also had tax cuts in Kansas where they tried an extreme form of trickle-down economics. And again, it failed miserably, epically. I mean, since when does cutting your own income and keeping your spending rate about the same have a positive impact on your financial situation? It never does. It doesn't make any sort of fiscal sense. Now, that last part, again, about, well, I mean, you obviously got to cut spending, right? Now, this is the Republican argument. They say we've got to cut spending. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut social programs. And then we're going to touch things that don't impact the deficit at all, like, for example, Social Security. We're going to go raid that. No. You keep your hands off that, right? That is an earned benefit. That is something that people have paid for. And again, doesn't add a penny to the deficit. But this is a Republican plan. Run up giant debts and deficits and then say, what can we do? Well, we have to cut these social programs. There's, of course, another effect that happens as well. And I'll go on to explain that. But overall, tax cuts never pay for themselves, at least when it comes to the rich. But what happened is that the donor class was very, very happy with these tax cuts. And now, thanks to a deal with the Democrats, by the way, President Trump doesn't have to worry about hitting the debt ceiling or going over any sort of fiscal cliff. In fact, the recent deal postponed a fight on the debt ceiling. That means Donald Trump can spend and spend and spend, and then doesn't have to come to an agreement with Democrats in order to spend on certain things or to reduce his spending in the military, etc., because there will be no debt ceiling. It's been postponed until after the election. How convenient for him, where we could have a Democratic president, like, for example, Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, imagine what a debt ceiling fight would do if Bernie Sanders wants to get Medicare for all passed. The Republicans can simply say, well, we're not going to pass a debt ceiling increase. If you want to go for Medicare for all, you have to drop it, or we're going to make sure that the entire government defaults on money that it's already spent, that it's already borrowed. It's not borrowing. It's not new borrowing. It's not financing new spending. It's just paying for things that we've already borrowed. I mean, what a horrible, horrible agreement. What a horrible deal. And corporate Democrats are like, yes, no debt ceiling. Trump, spend away, spend away. In fact, we'll help you. We'll actually help increase money that goes to the Pentagon. Ridiculous, ridiculous. But anyway, now, all of this, the deficit spending has actually led to a lot of criticism from both Republicans and Democrats, interestingly enough. Amy McGrath, Kentucky Democratic challenger to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, said this: "Great work by Mitch McConnell in deepening our budget deficit. I guess it was worth it to give his rich friends and donors a tax break." Well, she's right about that. Look, she's, I believe you're more corporate Democrat. But hey, look, great. I love that criticism. And then, interestingly enough, you also had GOP Florida Governor Jeb Bush. He said this: revenue up 3%, spending up 8% equals a deficit of $897 billion in 10 months. DC doesn't care. Oh, look, hey, for that comment,
please clap.
Gotta clap. Look, and it's true, they don't care. And by the way, it should be noted that Jeb's brother is former GOP President George W. Bush. He oversaw a $1.4 trillion deficit, a stock market crash, and more than 800,000 jobs lost in a single month. You want to talk about record of disaster, record of failure? How about we clap for that, right? Now, there's some more. CNBC economy analyst John Harwood also replied to this. He said that the part of DC with all the power at the time wanted its taxes cut and insisted this wouldn't happen. Well, they always do. It's what they always do and what they always say. And Molly Jong Fast finally says, maybe electing the guy with all the bankruptcies and debt was a bad idea. No kidding. And then finally, there was a pro-Trump Twitter critic who also weighed in on this. And he said, it seems after Obama, the elected conservatives have conveniently dropped fiscal from their descriptions. I can ignore the false talking points, but I think neither side brings this up because the spending means votes until the dollar becomes worthless. Now, look, we have our own reserve currency, so it's not going to happen until, unless, of course, the rest of the world decides that they're not going to hold us as the world's reserve currency. Then that would be a complete economic disaster. So let's hope that doesn't happen. But here's the thing, right? So do both sides like to spend money? Well, of course. Now, as a progressive, I think we should spend money on programs that help people. For example, things like Medicare for All, which does actually save us money over our current system, free college for everybody, Green New Deal, because we only have less than 12 years to do something about climate change before it comes basically just incredibly disastrous, right? So that's progressives. Now, Democrats are not progressives. Democrats are not progressives. Now, there are some progressives that are Democrats, for sure. But those two things are different. Generally, Democrats do want to spend money on some social programs that do help people, right? For example, they're fierce defenders of the SNAP program, right? But they also, through a lot of their policies, also help corporations. In fact, if they can both help a corporation and needy people at the same time, well, they jump all over it, right? But generally, most of what they do goes to help giant corporations and wealthy people. Now, Republicans are 100% a, a money funnel to the rich. In fact, that is the entire purpose of the Republican Party, is to funnel cash to the already wealthy. And so that's the difference, right? That's the difference here. And these are all the politicians, okay? Now, Republican politicians, they'll spend and spend and spend as long as it helps the rich, as long as it helps their donors. Now, they don't want Democrats doing that, right? Because, hey, look, they're right in a way that spending, yes, does equal votes. Because if you spend on a program that happens to be very popular, well, what's going to happen? You're going to get votes. You're going to get votes for that. So what they did a long time ago, and we're talking decades, right? They made a trap. Now, this is a trap that corporate Dems always seem to fall into. And it makes these corporate Democrats do austerity, cut social programs to clean up the debts run by Republican administrations. So Republicans get into power and they run up all this debt. They fund the military. They do giant tax cuts. Sometimes they launch two unfunded wars in the Middle East. Can you think of somebody who did that? Yeah. And so that costs trillions and trillions of dollars. And then suddenly, when a Democrat gets into office, they scream about being fiscally responsible. That corporate Democrat says, oh my God, you're right. I need to do something about this. And basically, they have adopted the Republican narrative of we must do spending cuts, we must do austerity, and we can't do these big, ambitious programs. No, because Republicans are right. We've got to give tax cuts, right, to these corporations, to these businesses, and tax cuts for the people because that'll fix everything, right? Instead of new programs and new government spending. So that's what happened, right? Now, the other side effect of that, of course, is that you have Democrats now that scream about, oh my God, we can't do the Green New Deal. We can't do Medicare for all. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? I mean, look at all this debt that we're in, and look at how expensive these programs really are. They fall into that trap. Either that, or they are, of course, now socially liberal Republicans, socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and they have taken over mainly the Democratic Party. And this is how the money continues to flow to the rich, while they continue to starve the poor. And as far as Republican politicians, again, I've already pointed out a lot of the problems with the corporate Democrats, but Republicans, their politicians are complete and utter hypocrites when it comes to debts and deficits. And that is a stone cold fact. All right. I'm going to take a break. We'll come back. Um, we've got the Border Patrol agent story, the racist Border Patrol agent. You're going to get infuriated. So we'll save that for when we come back from the break. Then we've got, of course, Bernie Sanders versus the media again. And I'll show you all the different ways that media is trying to screw Bernie. So stay right here. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. Please like and share the stream, and we'll see you in a couple around the nation. All right, we're back. Round the nation right here, TWT Nation. I made some adjustments to the audio, so I was. Don't worry, guys. I was watching. I was. I saw your feedback, so hopefully everything's a little bit better now. So we'll see. Uh, but let me move these here. The thing about taking your camera with you to an event is you got to plug it back in and set everything up exactly as it was before. And so that can lead to issues, apparently. But okay. Anyway, let's just dive in to the next story here and prepare to get outraged, of course. All right. Now, a Border Patrol agent has pleaded guilty for intentionally running into a migrant with his vehicle. Now, this is a government vehicle, right? So now this agent is 39-year-old Matthew Bowen, and he was stationed in the border town of Nogales, and he faces up to $100,000 in fines and could spend a year in prison for nearly running over a Guatemalan migrant. So Bowen. Oh, that's weird. Freudian slip here. Bowen was charged last year for hitting a 23-year-old Antolin Lopez Aguilar, a undocumented immigrant from Guatemala, with his Border Patrol truck and then allegedly falsifying his report about the incident. Prosecutors said the 10-year Border Patrol veteran, who was indefinitely suspended for the agency following his indictment, came, quote, within inches of running Lopez Aguilar over. The migrant reportedly suffered abrasions on his right hand and both of his knees after being struck by the vehicle. So now you might think, okay, look, this is probably an accident, right? I mean, come on. He didn't mean to run him over, so he got a little too close. Had to have been an accident, right? No, you're going to be shocked to find out that this guy has a history of saying racist things about migrants. In court, prosecutors cited texts from the agent weeks before the incident in which he referred to migrants as, quote, mindless, murdering savages. Well, now wait a minute. Who seems more savage? The Guatemalan who is trying to make his way up to America for a better life, or the guy who tries to run him over with his truck? Maybe they've got a different definition of savage. Okay. He's also referred to him as S-bags, subhuman, unworthy of being kindling for a fire. Now, look, is any of this a shock to you? No, of course not. As somebody who thinks a certain group of people are subhuman would do something like this, especially since he has the power to be able to do something like this, especially since the President of the United States tacitly agrees with these kinds of hateful acts in his rhetoric. But it gets worse. I know. It gets worse. Because this guy was not alone in his thinking. And I'm not just saying across the country, because of course, right? No, what I'm saying is that this was in the agency. In fact, Bowen's attorney claimed at the time that the inflammatory language was, quote, commonplace throughout the Border Patrol's Tucson sector, and that it is part of the agency's culture. Now, wait a minute here. This was supposed to be his defense. I mean, look, the racist texts. No, everybody in Tucson at this Border Patrol agency talks like that. I mean, that's just the culture. Why get him in trouble? So this wasn't a racist attack at all. No, it was everybody talks like that. Are you kidding me? That is almost unbelievable, right? How just open they are about their racism, about how much they hate these people, that these migrants who literally have nothing and are running for their lives. I mean, again, the defense is what? No, we're almost all completely racist. I mean, who do you think wants to become a Border Patrol agent, right? Especially now that we've been empowered to do whatever we want to the migrants. Kick over, food and water. Make sure that these people that are coming across the border desperate don't get water. Look, by the way, the Facebook group that they were in, right? So they were in a Facebook group. We found that out. That actually had thousands of current and former border agents. And what was it filled with? It was filled with anti-immigrant hatred. I mean, seriously, not only against just immigrants or migrants or asylum seekers, whatever. Also, they went after congresswomen, the congresswomen that came to visit, including AOC. They were talking about throwing burritos at her, as well as doing explicit, uh, uh, depictions of, Donald Trump sexually assaulting her. I mean, this is gross stuff. This this is the culture in the Border Patrol. Again, thousands of agents were involved in this. Not one spoke up. Not one said, "Hey, you know what? That is inappropriate." That not only is a person, a person of color, but also as a U.S. Congresswoman. They didn't speak up at all. No, they joked, they laughed about it because that's who they are. These people are deeply racist. And look, if you don't see a problem with having a Facebook group that is dedicated to this kind of hatred, then maybe you need to look at yourself in a mirror, figure out your own values. Now, the frustrating thing to me, of course, is the fact that he got a plea deal, right? In which, according to the Arizona Republic, quote unquote, court documents, said the agent had to admit to intentionally striking Lopez Aguilar with his truck. He said, "During my apprehension, I intentionally struck him with an unreasonable amount of force. My actions were not justified and violated his rights protected by the Constitution of the United States." So that is basically the only crime that he ended up confessing to. I violated his constitutional rights as a migrant. As part of his plea deal, prosecutors agreed to dismiss a second charge against Bowen for allegedly lying to investigators, falsifying his reports. So he hits somebody with a truck, tries to cover it up, and all they do is say, "Oh, we'll just get you for hitting the guy because you admitted that you hit the guy." Wow. And now, look, one of the other things, of course, is that he was also forced to tender his resignation, so he can no longer be serving as a member of Border Patrol. Okay, that's fine, but none of that actually solves a problem within the Border Patrol. And that's the culture. We need to investigate the Tucson Border Patrol office. Actually, no, we need to investigate all of Border Patrol. Kick out the people who are racist. If that is the culture there, then it is completely unacceptable. They should not be in this job. If you think migrants coming from El Salvador or Honduras or Guatemala or any of these Central American countries or Mexico, etc., if you think people coming over the border are mindless subhuman savages that aren't worth kindling, then you do not belong in this job. That is the type of toxic culture that ironically leads to people being hit by their trucks or, in even worse circumstances, dying in their custody, as has happened. So, look, every single person making those kind of statements, for one, need to be fired immediately. For this guy, no, we should charge him with a hate crime. That's what this is. This is a hate crime, pure and simple. Go back, look at his text, look at the things that he has said about these migrants. And if you don't come up with a conclusion that this was racially and motivated by hate and racism, then you just don't want to see it. Okay. That's frustrating. Moving on. Now you're going to be shocked to find out that corporate media seems to have a problem with Senator Bernie Sanders. and that they get especially touchy when he decides to point it out. Now, this latest blowup came during a speech in New Hampshire. So now he was telling a crowd about Amazon and how they and other big corporations um, don't pay enough taxes. In fact, Amazon paid no taxes on $11 billion worth of profit in 2018. That's insanity. Now, during this conversation, or this speech, I should say, the Washington Post came up, right? Now, the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, right? And Sanders said this. He said, um, the Post, who owns Amazon, doesn't write particularly good articles about me. I don't know why, but I guess maybe there's a connection. Now, is that true? Yes, Bezos definitely owns the Washington Post. He also definitely owns Amazon. And yes, the Washington Post definitely writes negative articles about Bernie Sanders. What there is not true. Again, you only have to go back to the 2016, and not only that, but there are more recent examples. But just let me give you some of these examples from 2016. The 16 negative articles written within 16 hours. Look, let me give you some of the titles, right? 5 reasons Bernie Sanders lost last night's Democratic debate. And the most partisan center of 2015, Bernie Sanders. Awkward reality for Bernie Sanders. Strategy focused on whiter states. Excuse me, I'm talking. Bernie Sanders shuts down Hillary Clinton repeatedly. Bernie Sanders' 2 big lies about the global economy. Bernie Sanders pledges the U.S. won't be number 1 in incarceration. He'll need to release lots of criminals. This is huge. Trump, Sanders, both using same catchphrase. On and on and on. Okay. So those are some of the examples of those ridiculous headlines. And they continue into, 20. Look, they haven't ever actually stopped going after Bernie Sanders. But since he's doing so well in the primary, he's behind Biden. He's actually a recent poll out of New Hampshire. He's actually beating Biden by quite a few points. So that's got people writing increasingly negative articles about Bernie Sanders. So now that statement, as I said, absolutely true, right? But it was enough to infuriate every single establishment pundit. So let me go here to Martin Barrett, right? So this is his people at the Washington Post. Now he's the Post executive editor, right? He called Sanders' statement a conspiracy theory. Quote, contrary to the conspiracy theory the senator seems to favor, Jeff Bezos allows our newsroom to operate with full independence, as our reporters and editors can attest. Oh, right, because, your reporters and editors would definitely admit that Bezos has an influence, right? Oh, no, of course. Well, you know how you'd figure that out? Write a negative article against Amazon. See how far you go. Write an article saying Jeff Bezos needs to pay his freaking taxes. How about that? Again, let's see how far you can go, right? Before you might get a talking to by management. Now, there's more. The Post media columnist Margaret Sullivan chimed in with this. He said, I've never seen or heard a hint of Jeff Bezos interfering in Washington Post coverage. CNN's Chris Cillizza. Now, this is not Washington Post editor or writer. This is a CNN guy, establishment. Again, he chimed in. He said, for the last 3 years for the last 3 of my years at the Post, Bezos owned the company. Not once in all that time, and I wrote multiple pieces a day about politics and politicians, including Sanders and Trump. Over that time, was there ever even a whiff of Bezos' influence in the newsroom? So now here's the thing, right? Now Bernie Sanders isn't saying that there is a edict, right, of talking points that you must use, that you must go and write about, and this is how you're going to say it. No, it's not. Doesn't operate the same way that Fox News operated under Roger Ailes, who literally would do that. He would tell everybody, "Here's your talking points for the day. Now go and put them in your shows." Now, again, Washington Post. There's no evidence that they do that, but there is evidence of a bias, and so you don't have to be in a newsroom, or dictating on high, like Roger Ailes, to have an influence in some of the stories. No, the biggest influence is the culture, right? As well as who is hired to be a Washington Post writer. And so you've got people at the Washington Post. They live in Washington, D.C., of course. They live in New York. And they have this bubble, right? And I'm not saying that they're bad people because they live in this bubble, but when you're around these, high paid consultants all day, that's who you talk to. Other high paid journalists, and again, media consultants and politicians, etc., members of the establishment, you start to get ingrained into that culture, right? And you start to be a part of that bubble. And in that bubble, they don't understand why people like Bernie Sanders. Okay. So they don't understand, like, what are you talking about? Well, we don't like Bernie Sanders. We think his plans are crazy. Get rid of private insurance. But I love private insurance. Uh, my son and daughter are in the private insurance industry. How dare you talk about taking that away when it helps so many people? They don't get it. They don't get it. And look, it's not as if a lot of these people are even aware that they have it. That's why one of the reasons why they chafe so hard at being called biased against progressives. But it's true. It's true. And look, let's be fair. We all have biases, right? I have a bias. I'm upfront about it. I'm a progressive. That's my bias. And look, what I do is you guys know I have that perspective. And whether you're progressive or not, I'm going to be upfront. I'm going to be honest with you guys. And I'm going to give you my opinion, but I'm going to base it on the facts, right? Now, I'm not saying that people at the Washington Post don't actually look at the facts. There's a lot of great journalism that comes out of them in the New York Times, original reporting. But a lot of the opinion stuff, it's garbage, absolute garbage. Now, the writers at the Washington Post, when you bring up that they might have a bias, they said, no, 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 that's absolutely ridiculous. I don't have a bias at all. Again, everybody that I talk to thinks that, we shouldn't raise taxes on the rich, that Bernie Sanders is a lunatic, and that he's just like Donald Trump, and that he's a sexist, he's a misogynist, etc. And that a real Democrat, Americans want a real Democrat who's a moderate, who's not going to change anything, right? And also that we're completely 100% fair in our reporting. How dare you say otherwise? Because that is a conspiracy. Well, here we have great examples of this happening literally in real time. And the problem goes much deeper, right? Look, these media institutions, and this is what Sanders is pointing out, these media institutions are for profit entities. They're literally businesses, right? And so, of course, they're going to look at their business interests above all things. So their business interest lies in, of course, protecting the status quo, making sure that corporations and the wealthy continue to do very well and that we don't disrupt the system. You cannot challenge that bottom line. And so when you have a candidate out there that does challenge that system, that does promise to shake things up, let me give you another example. Donald Trump's a living example. When he was running his campaign, I'm going to change the system. I'm going to upend the status quo. Now, of course, he didn't. Turns out he loves the status quo. He just wanted to make sure to dip his hand into the pot too, so that he can get rich off of it, right? Bernie Sanders is not like that. He generally will change the status quo, and that's why there's a lot of Democrats out there, Democratic pundits, members of the establishment media that would rather Donald Trump win than a real progressive, because he knows, or they know, that Bernie Sanders would bring actual lasting change. So, but look, again, television, talking about pundits, etc. Look, is the same way as the Washington Post. Again, they're super biased against Bernie Sanders, but whenever you point that out, they get super, super upset about it. So now let me give you an example of the bias here on mainstream TV, right? So there's recently a trending hashtag, right? My Bernie story. It's basically where people share their reasons where they supported Bernie Sanders. Now, a lot of it had to do with healthcare, student loan debt. There's a lot of uplifting, very personal stories, great stories, right? It was trending at number one yesterday on Twitter, right? So now MSNBC, since it was trending, since it was very popular, decided that they would cover it. Now, how did they decide to cover it? Well, let me give you a hint. That's MSNBC putting up a tweet that says this. Here's my Bernie story. The year was 2016, and Bernie was already long eliminated from contention. An actual Democrat would have stopped torpedoing the nominee and worked to defeat Trump, but Bernie looks had books to sell. The end. That is, of course, uh, a, a very well-known Twitter troll that hates Bernie Sanders. So that was on Brian Williams' show. Now, Brian Williams is a complete fraud and a hack. This is the guy who lied about being under fire in a helicopter, okay, under rocket fire. This is a guy who said that Donald Trump's attacks on Syria, when we were launching the missiles, called them absolutely beautiful. Oh, look at that beautiful American weaponry. Oh, I'm so inspired. Well, you're not going to be inspired when you see where those rockets land. I mean, look, this is an example. This is an example. Out of all the tweets they could have chosen, they chose this, the anti-Sanders troll account by some horse guy, an anonymous Twitter troll. And then the panel went on to trash Bernie Sanders. This is not a case of angry old man is attacking media. He must just be like Donald Trump. And that's the other thing that comes from this, of course. Numerous headlines from the Washington Post saying, the Bernie echoes Trump, takes page out of Trump's playbook, attacks media. No, this is Sanders defending himself against a very long-standing media bias against him. That's what's going on here. Now, look, does Trump attack the media? Yes. Now, he does so when the media actually gets it right and calls him out. He calls the press, in response, the enemy of the people. Now, look, you ask even the most hardcore Bernie Sanders supporter, they're going to say, now, wait a minute, hold on here. Enemy of the people, that might be a little too much. You know why? Because that kind of rhetoric spawns violence against newsrooms. And we've seen this happen before. Violence against actual journalists, right? And so we're like, no, we're not in favor of doing that. Now, does the media have a lot of problems? Absolutely. Is the media structure completely and 100% broken? Yes, and that's exactly what Bernie Sanders says. And that's the difference, right? Donald Trump wants to destroy the media. He wants to replace it with Fox News propaganda, whereas progressives, we actually want to make it better. Now, if the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, MSNBC, if they actually did their jobs, guess what? I'd be out of mine. And that'd be okay. We wouldn't need independent news to call them out when they do the wrong thing, because they'd be actually doing the right thing, which is informing the American people and not lying and not twisting agendas and not, basically giving terrible opinions that are not at all based on fact, the factual policy that Bernie Sanders has put out. So, look, this is not an attack. This is not spreading conspiracy theories. Not when you point out what is obvious bias and why they could have that bias, because they are large for-profit corporations. After all, I remember an ex-MSNBC host, right, that was told not to cover Bernie Sanders specifically for a specific reason, right? And that was, of course, the late Ed Schultz. I mean, again, that's exactly what they did, right? They told him, don't do it. Don't do it. We're going to have you do something else because we don't want Bernie Sanders, getting any sort of positive coverage on our channel. And this was what happened in 2016. Between this and all the negative articles against him, again, There's an article talking about this or something different in Iowa that's titled, and this is from the New York Times. Most presidential candidates use the 10-day Iowa State Fair to showcase their retail campaigning skills, but Bernie Sanders spoke to almost no one. And yet there are pictures of Bernie Sanders speaking in Iowa to a massive crowd. It is so bad that that the New York Times had been ratioed in that tweet by quite a bit. That's an example, right? Between that, the negative commentary on cable news, the constant comparisons between him and Trump, the social media bots and fake accounts that belong to so called centrists on social media, the zombie Bernie bro narrative that will not go away, it will die because it won't die because it's amplified and echoed all throughout different forms of media. That is just a testament to how much they despise what Bernie Sanders stands for. And what he stands for is fundamental transformational change. And that scares a lot of people. Okay. That's, you know what? I'm out of time. I'll save the pharmaceutical story for tomorrow. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for going around the nation with me today. Please like and share the stream if you haven't already. Um, let's see. Um, Please consider becoming a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That's a way that you can help the show out, help it get better. Uh, Thank you guys. Um, yeah, that's it. uh, love you guys. Remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. We'll see you guys later.